Does the White House, does this administration simply need to provide evidence that these are in fact hardened criminals, gang members, as has been alleged? Wouldn't that put this all to rest?
Well, I think what will put it to rest is once each of these individuals that was deported to this hellhole in El Salvador have an opportunity to present evidence that they're not a member of the gang that Trump claims they are. So far, the administration has come forward with no evidence that any of these people belong to that gang. There has been other evidence brought forward by the plaintiffs in this case that some of these people had nothing to do with this alleged Venezuelan gang. So what it really comes down to, despite the fact that this law was in effect back at the founding of our republic, that comes down to due process being given to the individuals who are going to be deported and have been deported. That's what it all comes down to. The judge didn't rule on the validity of that ancient law. He didn't rule on other aspects of this. But the bottom line that his decision reached today was that each of these individuals was entitled to a due process hearing.
Well, let's get a taste of what it was like in the hearing today around these deportations, where the judge on this appellate panel, one of the three of them, Patricia Millett, made a pretty fiery comment when speaking to the Deputy Assistant Attorney General. Here it is.
There were plane loads of people. I mean, it's a class action. There were plane loads of people. There were no procedures in place to notify people. Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemy Act than has happened here, where the proclamation required the promulgation of regulations, and they had hearing boards.
Putting aside her characterization of the actual treatment here, Nick, to her point on this being about the Alien Enemy Act, you were just speaking about this, describing it as an ancient law. Is that ultimately what this will come down to if due process questions are sorted out, whether or not President Trump has the legal authority to use this, given we are not actively at war with Venezuela?
Well, I think there's a real problem with the use of this statute because we are not at war with Venezuela, or we are not at war with these gangs. What it comes down to is due process and whether or not they have an opportunity to be heard and to present evidence. I mean, I think that the judge, in his opinion today, went through the entire history of that act. And even in World War II, when individuals who were of German descent, Italian descent, that were being deported under this act, they had hearings. Here, there was no hearing. It looks like, in fact, that what the Trump administration did was to move this as quickly as possible, try to keep it as quiet as possible, and move people out before anybody could get a hearing. And I think that's the part on this entire matter that's absolutely reprehensible.
It was interesting hearing from the judge on this. Clearly fed up with what he has been hearing from the administration. Going back to the hearing last Friday, he talked about his concern about, quote, intemperate and disrespectful language. He said, I'm not used to hearing from the United States. Nick Akerman, have we just entered a new age, a new realm for the way decorum is considered in court? Or could this administration jeopardize its own case with the language that we've heard, including calls for the impeachment of this judge?
Well, I think both of those. The answer is yes to both. First of all, They have started an entirely new way of reacting to a judge. And what's really remarkable here, it's not just lawyers from the Justice Department. These papers are actually signed by the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, and his assistant. So it's not like it's just the attorneys for the Department of Justice. It is the highest level of the Department of Justice that is signing off on this language that's used in the papers. And so what is really at issue here is whether or not they simply ignored the judge's order at the time he gave it last week and sent out those planes and refused to turn them around. And it wasn't because anybody believed necessarily that people were innocent, or if they were members of the gang, that they shouldn't be deported. The question came down to whether or not they were entitled to a hearing. And this Department of Justice totally ignored what is essentially always been a basic right under that statute going back to World War II and World War I and the War of 1812.
Nick, I'd also like to ask you about what we're seeing with big law firms who have in the past litigated against the former Trump administration or otherwise have been involved in cases related to it. Obviously, we saw the agreement that the firm Paul Weiss made with the administration, but also a memorandum that went out from the Department of Justice around those legal efforts and how they could potentially be targeted now by this administration. What do you make of what actually is going on and how it changes the nature of the relationship between the courts and the White House, or what happens in court, rather?
Oh, it's huge in the sense that, I mean, as I wrote today in my Substack column, Legal Politics, Trump has basically taken this on his retribution tour against lawyers and law firms and has gone nuclear on them. It all started with Perkins Coie, another big law firm that represented Hillary Clinton and other Democrats. They at least stood up to Trump. They went into court. They got a temporary restraining order. The judge came down hard on the administration, but that didn't stop him. A couple days later, what did they do? They went after Paul Weiss. With respect to what they are doing with these executive orders is basically saying that they cannot do business with the government, that they are going to not have security clearances for any of their lawyers, which means they can't represent the government in certain cases. And it also affects their clients because clients are going to leave. And if you look at the Paul Weiss situation, they were kind of put into a bind in the sense that they had clients that were leaving and they had headhunters calling their lawyers and recruiting people knowing that the firm was in big trouble, which is why they were forced into a settlement here. Now, on top of all that, the problem with that settlement is it has just encouraged Donald Trump to go even further because the day after he entered into that settlement with Paul Weiss, he issued the memorandum that you referred to before that essentially puts a warning out to all lawyers that if you're going to be working against the government and representing clients against the government, that you're going to be looked at very carefully, that if we find that you misstep in any way, that we're going to try and get sanctions on you. We're going to basically go after your clients and take away their government contracts, take away your ability to have security clearances. And on top of it all, to make matters even more outrageous, they've also said that they're going to look at their behavior going back 10 years from today. So it's not just what they're doing in representing clients in legal cases currently, but this is going to go back in time to even further incur retribution on lawyers that they don't like. And the problem here is that particularly with big law firms, even small firms, individual lawyers are going to be very wary about going into court and representing indigent clients against the government or even clients that are paying money, because the government has made it clear that if you do this, we're going to come after you. We're going to take away your clients. We're going to take away your clients' contracts. We're going to make it impossible for you to deal with the government.
Nick, we're just about out of time, but I have to ask you about this story that everyone's talking about today in Washington by the Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg. The Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plans is the headline. He was invited for some reason to a Signal chat. Members of the cabinet on there, including the defense secretary, says he sent him and others war plans for attacking Yemen. The White House has acknowledged this. The president was asked today about the Espionage Act when he was in front of reporters. He didn't answer it. Does it apply?
Well, I'm not sure if it applies because it depends if they had the criminal intent here. But clearly, this was outrageous. There is no excuse for using a public means of communication. You can rest assured that the Russians could be listening in on that. The Chinese could be listening in on that. And if you listen to this conversation, it all rings true. They're talking about whether or not they're going to clear up the Suez Canal and open up the shipping. And what do they talk about? They talk about, well, should we really do it? Because we don't have that much shipping. The U.S. doesn't maybe 10%, but it's the Europeans that we're doing this for. And maybe there's some way we can get the Europeans to reimburse us for this raid on the Houthis. I mean, this is just absolutely off the charts. One, it's terrible that they're using public means to communicate on war plans. And two, that this is the way they're making decisions based on whether or not they're going to be reimbursed for having made a raid on the Houthis. I mean, there's just a lot of little pieces in this that are really off the charts.